Hello, everybody. I am the intendant of Brussels Metropolitan, and I would like to share some thoughts with you today, but let me first present to you very briefly this organization. It has been founded 8 years ago by the employers' federations in this country. We have 3 of them, regional, and 1 at the federal level. And our preoccupation at the time was to mobilize our efforts to make sure that the Brussels metropolis would become a better place for the creation of wealth and the creation of jobs and interesting activities to reinforce the attractivity of our city. We have recently concentrated our efforts on mobility as we have identified this issue as being the #1 and by far regarding our Brussels metropolis. So basically what we have done is that we are putting together around the table all the actors and stakeholders of mobility. Mobility is a very complex issue, you know that. And the only way we have found is to have people having a little stake, a little influence, a little power to work and dialogue with each other. Not always very glamorous, but damn efficient when it works. So we do communication, we do discreet lobbying, we mediate, we create coalitions, and we work on very concrete projects, 12 as we speak. Our founding members on the left, BECI, Union Wallonne, VOCA, and VBO-FEB, we are sponsored and helped financially by the 3 regions of this country, which makes a unique place where the 3 competing regions in this newly federalized state tend to collaborate. And we fortunately have also private sponsors, and I'm glad to present you here their logo. But in all the activities we have been able to pursue these last years, something has really struck me, and that was the mutual weaving, the intertwining, I would say, of 2 important concepts and realities of our lives, space and time. And especially in the realm of mobility, they play a very, very important role. So let me first start with this. In our lives, we tend to focus more on the passage of time than on traveling distances. If you think about it, you say, oh, that old gentleman died at the age of 82 years. And even if mankind becomes more and more mobile and we travel more and more, we don't say he died at 2,000 or 2,648,252 kilometers. We say, I'm taking 15 days holiday. You don't say, I'm taking 2,527 kilometers holiday, even if that is the distance to go to your holiday spot and to come back from it. And we are all chasing after time. We don't say, oh, I only have, we say we only have 24 hours a day. We don't say we have 37 kilometers a day, because that would be, by hypothesis, the average distance we roam, we travel every day. Still, the perception of space is for us more direct than time. In mobility, we can consider space, of course, expressed in kilometers. Sometimes we do it in time, when we are in congestion, or even when you are in the center of the city, we look at a signpost and we see that the cathedral is in front of us at 2 minutes walk, the station at 5 minutes on our left, or the town hall 7 minutes from the place we are. But globally, we don't express and we don't put enough focus on time when we speak about mobility, for a very simple reason, and that is that while space is very objectively measurable, it is not the case of time. Time can be, of course, objectively measured with a chronometer, but it is also a very subjective reality because it is a perception and because we have all our own way to inhabit time. But still, in mobility, as I said, we tend to privilege space over time. And that has translated itself into the fact that in mobility, we have always given a preference to the expression of space, which is called infrastructure, instead of giving preference to the expression of time. That would be the way we process time, and we master time. The result is that we have faced an increasing demand for mobility. I'll come back to that notion in a moment. But our way to respond to that increasing demand has been an increased offer, but not a well thought of offer, and not very sophisticated, to say the least. So to more demand, we have responded with more space devoted to mobility, more infrastructure. We have created even more roads, even wider. We now are in the middle of a reflection on knowing if and whether we should broaden and enlarge the ring, the outer highway ring around Brussels. Are we so sure that this is the thing we should do, knowing all the revolutions that are ahead of us in terms of the new automobile that is now being invented? There are other ways to react to that. We all know that in Brussels, the metro line from the west to the east is totally saturated. We could have reacted by saying, oh, let's build another one, just left of the first, or right of the first, or beneath the first. No, we have decided to automatize, making sure that the same infrastructure would actually allow to carry more people. This has had other results. Quality of life outside and inside our cities, negative externalities, CO2 emissions, car accidents, immense waste of working hours in the congestion. And still we have been doing that again and again because maybe the prehension of space is more evident for us than the prehension of time. So we need to interrogate ourselves about our need, our true need of mobility. Because I just discussed the question of the offer, but there is also the other coin, or the other side of the coin, the same coin, which is the demand. And the demand comes from a need that is felt by an individual. So what is the need, as I would define it? It is the necessity felt by an individual or imposed by an organization he's working for, he's living in, to cross a distance between 2 points, A and B. Well, first of all, let's be honest with ourselves. Our need for mobility is not always a real need. It can be a wish or a comfort. We all know about the story of people taking their car to go and buy some bread at the bakery 300 meters away from the place where they live. But beyond the anecdote, we know also that need can be absolute or relative. By absolute, I mean that it's time constrained, time imposed, which is not the case when that need is relative and that you have the option of choosing your timing for traveling. So basically, we need also to reflect on what we could do to better interpret our needs into a newly formulated demand. Let's imagine we have the need to travel, but we know that it can be a true need, an absolute need, but even then it can disappear. If you decide to work from home with the new audiovisual technologies, you simply suppress that need that was a true need to travel, to go to your work. Your need can be relative, as I said, not time imposed, and then you can defer the moment where you start. You can adapt your working hours. You can decide to trick a little bit the system so that you do not express a demand that comes at the very moment where other people actually do the same. So we need to indeed formulate our demand in a more intelligent way. Responding to a more sophisticated offer of mobility, we should respond with a more intelligent demand on the side of the users. So what is demand, as I would express it? It is the expression or the formulation of a need of going from A to B, but taking into consideration some crucial elements of the equation being timing, being space, and transportation modalities. So in terms of timing, you can modulate your demand by accepting to travel at another time than the one you had previously or originally envisaged. Space is the route, the road, the itinerary, the way you choose to go. You could use other ways to go to the same place. As a matter of fact, let's think about it. GPS and the mobile apps, what do? They trick space in favor of time. They ask you to consider doing a longer way, but in order to win time. It's almost alchemistic. You transform space into time. And that is more and more useful, as we all know. Transportation means that you could decide to do exactly the travel you want to do, to take a transportation mean that will not get stuck into congestion. That would be train, that would be bike, that would be your 2 feet. And then even if you take, at the time you decide, on the route you decide, with the transportation you decide, even when you are in a congestion, you can still decide to make of time something not wasted but gain, not useless but meaningful, by accepting not to drive, but to be driven. And that is also a place where that increasing intelligence of the demand should be applicable. As you can imagine, in order to formulate a more intelligent demand, you need a mental shift. That mental shift can come from a higher state of consciousness. It can also come, let's be honest, from strong fiscal incentives like the road user charge. The road user charge, as you can imagine, is something that plays on all the above-mentioned dimensions: time, space, transportation mean, transportation modalities. I could not refrain from giving to you this incredible quote I spotted in an article about the congestion in London a few weeks ago, where a London-based journalist, Fergus O'Sullivan, said, "The way we run our road system is the last remnant of the Stalinist state. We ration demand by queuing." But it goes even beyond that. Because if we think about it, congestion is not an individual phenomenon. You are not congested all alone. You are congested with other people. So it is a very collective phenomenon. We speak about mass congestion. Now, the problem is that whereas the 20th century has been the century of mass, the 21st century tends to have the concept of mass disappearing. Let's think of a few examples. Mass production gives the floor for tailor-made production. Artificial intelligence propelled. Mass consumption yields to individual consumption driven by niche marketing and by tribe or patterned preferences. The mass political parties, they tend to dislocate in an exploded political landscape. Mass media have become social media. So we see the concept of mass is disappearing, except for one reality, which is the mass congestion. So I have a problem intellectually to understand how we can send people to the moon and soon to Mars discover the mysteries of our brain and the secrecies of our genes, invent new materials, new type of life and intelligence, and we could not solve that incongruous problem or issue of mobility. As a matter of fact, that mental shift, as you have understood, goes through shifting from that very brutal, very intuitive occupation of space towards the mastering of the processes of time. And I would like to deliver another quote to you, one from a person you might be surprised to see here, Pope Francis. 3 years ago, in one of his apostolic exhortations about poverty, but the questions were strikingly similar because he was speaking about the obligation for mankind, and especially, of course, for Christians, to work for a world that would be more just legally, economically, politically. And we could simply translate and here say a mobility place that would be legally, economically, and politically more optimal, and to some extent also more just. What did he say? One of the faults which we occasionally observe in social political activity is that spaces and power are preferred to time and processes. Giving priority to space means madly attempting to keep everything together in the present, trying to possess all the spaces of power and self-assertion. Giving priority to time means being concerned about initiating processes rather than possessing spaces. But because the slide was a bit short, I would like to add just another comment he made. Time governs spaces, illumines them and makes them links in a constantly expanding chain, with no possibility of return. What we need then is to give priority to actions which generate new processes in society, in mobility, and engage other persons and groups who can develop them to the point where they bear fruit in significant historical events. I would like to see that historical event 30 years down the road, when we will look back at the current times and when our children or grandchildren will ask us, how could you indulge, compromise, resignate yourself, and even accept to be stuck in absurd and surrealistic congestion and traffic jams? I would like to be able to answer to them by that time that we did what we had to do in order to prevent that and to stop that insanity. What we need to do is intelligently create the marketplace where a more sophisticated offer meets a more intelligent demand. What we have to do is to understand that we need to leave a little bit the dimension of space to enter decisively the dimension of time. I wish this to all of us, and may this grace fall upon us all. Thank you.
Wow. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Should we open the floor for one question at least? I know we're running out of time, but one question. A gentleman right there, please.
Hi, thanks for the talk, but I completely disagree. I think maybe I didn't understand it properly, but I come from London and everything is on time. You don't look at your journey for how the actual kilometers that it might take. You look at the time. So for me, it's actually a shift towards slowing down, not making it the quickest journey. It's about finding the best and the nicest journey. And that's a focus to space, in my opinion. Create spaces that people like to travel through, rather than focusing on efficiency. And building a bigger road around Brussels, I think, is a bad idea, because more cars will come and the same congestion will happen 10 years later.
I think we are in violent agreement. I did not plead for building more space. I exactly proposed the opposite, to maintain the existing infrastructure and to make a better use of it. And as a matter of fact, you came in my direction with your first comment, we need to slow down. Slow down is about, mixing space and time. It's making another use of space through another vision about time.
All right. Great. Thank you. Alan,
you, Alan.
thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.